George Jones. A name that carries the weight of heartbreak, the echo of a voice that could make strangers weep, and lovers remember what they had lost. He was a man who lived as intensely as he sang, each note a mirror of a life full of triumph, failure, and longing. Behind the fame and the sold-out arenas, there was a restless soul, a man chasing something no applause or accolade could ever truly satisfy. His story was one of brilliance shadowed by chaos, of love sought and sometimes lost, and of a heart that refused to settle for anything less than a fire that could burn completely. Born in a small Texas town, George carried the rawness of life in his veins from the start. Music became both his refuge and his calling, but with every success came personal turmoil. Lovers came and went, fortunes rose and fell, and the world watched a man who seemed untouchable, yet fragile, brilliant yet self-destructive. There was a longing in him, quiet yet relentless, a search for a love as fierce and unyielding as his own heart. And then, she appeared, a woman whose presence would ignite a storm of passion and public fascination, a love that was as complicated as it was undeniable. Their lives collided in ways the world could see but never fully understand. Together they would weather the glories and scandals of fame, leaving behind a story of devotion that would outlast every hit, every headline, every fleeting triumph. George Jones was born in Saratoga, Texas, in September 1943, the youngest of 3 children in a family shaped by hardship and faith. His early years were a tapestry of small-town struggles and tender moments, a place where music was both solace and escape. Sundays meant church and gospel hymns, and George learned to pour emotion into every note, even as the world around him demanded resilience. By the time he could walk, he was already absorbing the rhythms of life, the laughter, the sorrow, and the quiet perseverance that would later define both his music and his character. Music was his first love, and his earliest ambition. As a boy, George listened to the crackling voices of country radio, dreaming of a life beyond the dusty streets of his hometown. By his teens, he was performing locally, singing with a rawness that seemed older than his years, as though he carried every heartbreak he would ever endure in his throat. His talent was undeniable, and soon, small-time gigs gave way to recordings, each song a step closer to the stage lights and the audiences that would one day know him as one of country music's greatest voices. But talent alone could not shield George from the turbulence of life. His early adulthood was marked by fleeting romances, family obligations, and the quiet pressure of ambition. The road to Nashville was never straightforward. It demanded sacrifice, risk, and a resilience that George carried with stubborn pride. When his first records were released, they showcased a voice both tender and haunted, hinting at a depth that audiences would come to feel in their own lives. It was a voice that could make a lover remember what was lost, that could make a stranger cry without a word of explanation. The 1960s brought both opportunity and strain. George's career began to rise steadily, his songs climbing the charts, earning him the adoration of fans across the country. Behind the scenes, however, he struggled with the pressures of fame, the relentless touring and the personal demons that would shadow him for decades. He was a man caught between devotion to his art and the chaos of his private life, never fully at peace, yet always pushing forward with the intensity that defined him. By the end of the decade, George had established himself as a voice of authenticity in country music. Every heartbreak he sang, every whiskey-soaked ballad, felt lived in, a reflection of his own trials and triumphs. Yet even as he reached professional heights, there was a longing in his eyes, a search for something deeper than success or acclaim. His music was a mirror of the human experience, beautiful, messy, and relentless, and those who listened closely could sense the restless heart behind the songs, a heart still waiting for the kind of love that could match its own intensity. George Jones's rise was not just a story of talent, it was a story of perseverance, of vulnerability laid bare in every lyric. He carried the weight of his life into every performance, and in doing so he invited the world into the intimate corners of his soul. By the time the 70s approached, he was no longer just a young singer from Texas. He was a man whose voice had become a vessel for emotion itself, and whose journey was only beginning to intersect with a love that would change everything. The early 70s were a time of both triumph and turmoil for George Jones. His voice had become unmistakable, a vessel for sorrow, love, and longing that could strike listeners to their core. Yet behind the music, life was anything but orderly. Tours stretched endlessly across the country, and the pressures of fame collided with personal demons that refused to quiet. Nights blurred into mornings, bars became refuges, and moments of fleeting joy were often followed by deep regrets. He lived in extremes, exhilaration and despair, devotion and disappointment, each one feeding the authenticity of the songs he poured into the microphones. George's personal life mirrored the unpredictability of his career. Marriages began and ended, friendships fractured, and the world watched a man who seemed both invincible and profoundly fragile. Addiction tightened its grip, stealing hours, opportunities, and the illusion of control he tried so hard to maintain. Every hit song carried the weight of lived experience, and audiences felt it, unaware that the singer's triumphs were inseparable from his struggles. His brilliance in performance contrasted sharply with the private chaos that trailed him, making his story as compelling as any ballad he recorded. It was during this time of turbulence that George began to cross paths with Tammy Wynette, a rising country star whose life and career were entwined with her own trials. She was known for her powerful voice and her ability to channel heartbreak with an intimacy that resonated deeply with listeners. At first, their interactions were professional, shared stages, studio sessions, and mutual admiration for each other's craft. But there was a subtle undercurrent, a recognition of something familiar and unspoken. Both had lived lives marked by early hardships and personal loss, and in each other they glimpsed a reflection of resilience and longing. The public noticed the chemistry long before either acknowledged it privately. Songs recorded together carried an electric tension, a conversation without words, and audiences speculated about the bond forming behind the scenes. They challenged each other creatively, and their collaborations revealed a rare synergy that transcended music. Yet, beneath the flashes of glamour and applause, both George and Tammy were acutely aware of the fragility of happiness. The world saw their rising fame, and the stories splashed across magazines, but the intimacy of what they were building remained their own, a connection forged in shared vulnerability, tempered by the understanding of each other's past pain. Even as their relationship developed, George continued to wrestle with his personal struggles. Addiction remained a formidable shadow, straining relationships and testing resilience. But Tammy's presence introduced a new dimension to his life, a potential for stability and understanding that few had offered. Their connection was neither simple nor smooth. It was raw, complicated, and occasionally stormy, yet it was also undeniable. In the midst of a life marked by volatility, she became a constant that challenged him to confront his demons, to channel his intensity into something more than self-destruction, and to recognize that love could coexist with imperfection. By the mid-70s, the trajectory of George Jones' life had shifted. He was no longer merely a man defined by fame or addiction, nor solely by heartbreak. There was a new rhythm to his story, one that moved in tandem with Tammy Wynette's presence, one that hinted at a depth of love capable of shaping even the most tumultuous life. Their bond, forged in shared pain and mutual understanding, became a defining force in his personal and professional existence. The world would never fully grasp the magnitude of what it meant to George, but for those who looked closely, the seeds of a love that would outlast chaos were unmistakable. By the mid-70s, George Jones's life was a constant motion of tours, recording sessions, and headlines, yet a quiet gravity began to take hold. Tammy Wynette, a country star, whose own life had been shaped by resilience and early hardship, gradually became a pivotal presence. Their initial encounters were professional, shared stages, studio sessions, and mutual admiration, but an unspoken understanding began to form. For George, this was different from his past relationships. It required attention, patience, and emotional honesty he had rarely experienced. Tammy's voice carried both vulnerability and strength, a reflection of her own journey, and when paired with George's, it created a synergy that transcended music. Audiences heard more than harmony. They sensed a dialogue of two lives intertwining, each note revealing subtle truths. Behind the public eye, they shared private moments that spoke of trust, recognition, and a quiet respect for each other's struggles. In her presence, George discovered a partner who understood the depths of his heart and the complexities of his character. Their time together was far from effortless. Each brought personal histories marked by mistakes, broken relationships, and enduring challenges. Yet Tammy possessed a rare capacity for patience and understanding, able to meet George in his darkest moments without judgment. Together they navigated the turbulence of fame and the intensity of their personalities, creating a partnership that was equal parts passion, confrontation, and tenderness. Every disagreement, every quiet conversation after the spotlight faded, became part of a growing intimacy that strengthened their connection. Tammy's influence extended beyond personal support. She shaped George's artistic world as well. The songs they recorded together reveal a depth and nuance that mirrored their evolving relationship. They were not simply duets, they were reflections of trust, understanding, and the profound resonance of shared experience. For George, the collaboration was more than professional. It was an emotional dialogue, a space where love and art intertwined. In her presence, he could confront vulnerability without fear and explore feelings that had long been confined to private corners of his life. Even amid challenges, their relationship endured. Tammy did not erase the chaos that had accompanied George's life, nor did she diminish the force of his struggles. Instead, she became a constant, a stabilizing force who encouraged him to channel his intensity into meaningful expression. Their bond demonstrated that love did not require perfection. It required honesty, mutual respect, and the willingness to meet each other where life had left them. Together, they embodied a love that was resilient, complicated, and profoundly human. As time passed, it became clear that Tammy Wynette's presence was transformative. She was not merely a collaborator or companion. She was the one whose influence shaped George's late career, his personal growth, and his capacity for intimacy. In quiet moments behind the scenes of fame and acclaim, she became the anchor in a life otherwise defined by unpredictability. Their story was never simple, never free from conflict, but it was enduring, leaving an imprint on both the man and the music that would outlast any headline. In the tapestry of George Jones' life, Tammy Wynette emerged as more than a chapter. She was the heartbeat woven through every note, every lyric, and every reflection on love and loss. Their bond illustrated that the most profound connections are forged in vulnerability, resilience, and shared experience. And for George, she became the presence that defined his heart, long after the music faded and the lights dimmed. In the later years of his life, George Jones was no longer just the enigmatic singer whose voice carried heartbreak across the airwaves. He had become a figure of reflection, a man looking back on decades of triumph, struggle, and love. The reckless edges of youth had softened, replaced by a quieter awareness of time, mortality, and the relationships that had shaped him. Fame remained, but its urgency had faded, leaving space for contemplation of the life behind the spotlight. It was a life that had been far from perfect, yet in its imperfection lay a depth of experience that few could comprehend. Tammy Wynette remained central to that reflection, not only for the love they had shared, but for the ways in which she had shaped his understanding of intimacy, patience, and commitment. Their years together had been a tapestry of emotion, passion intertwined with disagreements, devotion shadowed by challenges, but the connection endured beyond headlines and public fascination. For George, her influence lingered in the choices he made, the music he recorded, and the quiet moments that no audience would ever witness. She had become the reference point for the love he had long sought, a mirror in which he could see both his own flaws and his capacity for connection. Looking back, George's story is inseparable from the legacy of his craft. Each song he recorded was a testament to lived experience, an archive of human vulnerability expressed through melody and lyric. His triumphs on the charts were only one measure of his impact. The more profound legacy lay in the way his music captured the universal complexities of longing, regret, and joy. Fans heard more than a voice. They felt a life laid bare, one that reflected struggles familiar to anyone who had known disappointment or yearned for love. In this way, George Jones became more than an icon. He became a mirror for the human heart, capable of expressing emotion with unparalleled honesty. Even as he faced health challenges in later life, George's dedication to music and the people he loved remained unwavering. Those who knew him intimately spoke of a man who beneath the public persona carried both gratitude and humility, someone who cherished moments of genuine connection and reflection. The intensity of his early years had evolved into a contemplative presence, a man aware of the fleeting nature of time and the enduring significance of those who had touched his life. Tammy's role in that journey was unmistakable. She had been the anchor in a life often buffeted by chaos, and her influence continued to resonate long after their marriage had ended. George's story reminds us that legacy is measured not solely by achievements or recognition, but by the depth of relationships and the emotional truth conveyed through one's work. His music remains a vessel for empathy, capable of speaking to the heart even decades later. And within that music, the presence of love, complex, resilient, and transformative, echoes persistently. It is the love he shared with Tammy Wynette, above all else, that casts a long, luminous shadow across his life. As the final chapters of his life unfolded, George Jones embodied both triumph and human frailty, a man who had loved deeply, erred openly, and found meaning in connection and reflection. The tumult of his earlier years had shaped him, the music had immortalized him, and the enduring presence of the woman who had touched his heart gave his life a resonance beyond fame. In remembering George Jones, we remember a man whose voice was unparalleled, whose life was profoundly human, and whose heart, despite every storm, had found the echo of a love that defined him in ways that outlasted the applause. George Jones' life was a journey of contrasts, triumph and turmoil, passion and heartbreak, fame and private reflection. Through it all, his voice remained a window into the soul, a vessel for the joys and sorrows that defined the human experience. Yet beyond the music, beyond the stage lights and the headlines, there was a heart that longed for understanding, for steadfast connection, and for love that could endure even the storms of his own making. Tammy Wynette, in all her resilience and warmth, became that anchor. Their bond was never simple, never free from challenges, but it was real, transformative, and enduring. In her presence, George discovered a depth of love that shaped him both personally and artistically, a love that echoed in every note he sang, every lyric he lived, and every reflection in the quiet moments away from the public eye. In the end, George Jones leaves behind more than music. He leaves behind a story of vulnerability, devotion, and the enduring power of love. For more emotional stories, check out this video.